Yeah. No, I think they tried that with Hitler. They all moved to one end, but it didn't, the bomb didn't work. Oh, thank you. I just, it's my days of that's where the idea of a hood came up, the hood.
Oh, right.
This was cool.
It could be gangster style.
Right. Well, it was one of the things I don't know, I somehow overlooked or heard from a teacher that there was a memo about watching for kids who had their collars up.
Droopy drawers, pants down.
Little did they know.
This weekend, I took my required, whatever it is, 2 hours of harassment training.
Oh, right, yeah, so.
A handshake is all that's allowed.
Oh, man.
Or touching.
Even if you use the middle finger, kind of. As if I did that to you. Oh, yes.
Well, they heard I was going to teach and fewer came. It was those questions.
Right, I think I've got all the mics and speakers set correctly. Mike, are you set correctly?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
This is Mike Marthia, not the mic.
Mike not only listens and talks.
The other day, my my Siri wouldn't talk to me. It gave me only directions. And I said to it, Siri, please talk to me. And the response was, I'm a better at listening. I have not.
Random questions from you, Joe.
Hey. Welcome.
I got to do one of these in a couple of weeks, and I figure I better come and learn from the best of them.
Right.
Increase the audience by 25%.
This is good. Okay. So in David's administration, David put Joab over the army. In the American president's administration, his title would have been Secretary of Defense. Zadok and Abiathar became priests, and many of David's sons also became priests. In England, the high priest would be the Archbishop of Canterbury. America has no equivalent. Jehoshaphat became recorder. There also was a king named Jehoshaphat. In America, Secretary of the Treasury, and he would count the money and pay the bills and inventory the gifts of tribute. Now this one, Sierra, I guess, was secretary. America, this would be both Secretary of State and Chief of Staff. And this person would manage David's schedule, write treaties, and perhaps even hire the historian who wrote the books of Samuel and Chronicles, which are our record of David's reign. Now, they would have written them, they were heavily edited, and I believe, and scholars believe, they were heavily edited in Babylon afterwards.
Yeah, I actually been thinking about this for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. For who were these written? Because
Yes.
the words aren't anybody could read, and it's not like you had a lending library or something like that, so for what were they written, and I'm still having to figure some of that out.
I think the people that could read were the people that went to Babylon. And so there was an audience there. It was the upper class that was captive. And also, synagogue worship began in Babylon. And so everybody would take their turn reading the Torah, I should think. And they were hired, they were brought there to be administrators mainly, because they could read, then they could learn another language and they could deal with what was going on and that was, I don't know if that was where that the rest will get me into trouble. David fulfills his promise to Jonathan and Saul. After all of David's enemies had been subdued, David was finally able to fulfill his promise to Saul and Jonathan. There's David walking with Jonathan, and also, I don't know what is going on in the other picture. Anyway, David asked, is there still anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? And so David's secretary sent people to search. And they found a servant from Saul's household whose name was Ziba. And Ziba told David that Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, the one who had been crippled in the fall, was still alive. We talked about that a while back. You may not have remembered. Does anybody remember in the early days of NCIS, there was a Ziba or Ziva or something close to that? I never can read this name and think male, but I should. David asked, where is he? And Ziba knew, and David sent for him. Mephibosheth came to David and fell on his face, prepared to beg for his life. And this was because it was customary for the king of a new dynasty to kill all members of the old dynasty. If that were done, members of the former king's family could never claim they were the rightful heirs to the throne and promptly start rebellions. David immediately saw Mephibosheth's despair and said, do not be afraid. I promise I will show you only kindness for your father's sake. And when David said to Ziba, all that belonged to Saul, I have given to Mephibosheth, I place you in charge of hiring servants to till his fields, harvest his crops, and market them. The profit is for Mephibosheth to spend as he deems fit. Mephibosheth was treated like one of David's own sons from that day forward. Mephibosheth's son, Micah, inherited his father's wealth. In this way, David fulfilled the promise to Saul and Jonathan. One of the scholars pointed out that for David to be able to give Saul's property to this son, apparently David must have been managing it for himself or the kingdom up to that point. Oh, darn. My questions aren't on this copy. I had a little trouble loading it. The question that I was going to ask is, at this time, when this is edited in Babylon, everybody, reads this story. It's a wonderful story you can tell children. Here's this little kid, and now, he's wealthy, and that's great, and it is great. But at the time this was included in the book of Samuel, the blind former king of Israel was eating at the emperor's table. And so you have to wonder what else was going on. What would be the other else, most logically? Well, this kid couldn't get away with starting a rebellion as long as he was. He wouldn't be handicapped. He wouldn't make a leader, but he could be the center of a problem if he wanted to be. So you have to wonder, is it all just love and wonderfulness? Or with David, there's always a little bit of political wisdom. David wants to build a temple, and God says, no, thank you. to the temple, but promises David he will found a dynasty. Now the king has settled into his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from fighting his enemies in battle. And David then discussed with his prophet Nathan the idea of building a palace, a temple, for the Ark of the Covenant. And David said, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of God stays in a tent." And Nathan said to the king, "Go and do all that you have in mind." In other words, build a temple. And the Lord, for the Lord is with you. Now, I got some of it in. It was customary for the new ruler in the Near East and Mediterranean area, all new rulers, to build temples to a favoring god. For instance, the Parthenon is dedicated to Athena. They believed that it ensured the god's continuing support. It brought their priest under the ruler's political control, and it assured people that that the god would show favor to them. Will the people of Israel allow, or will the God of Israel allow David to follow this example? The one thing about doing that was that a megalo-minded ruler would then think that God was in his back pocket. So just keep that in mind. However, that night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan, "Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, you are the one to build me a house," or excuse me, "are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have moved about among my people. Did I ever ask for a house in all that time?" One of the things that's also going on here is that we're making a transition from a tribal leadership to a king. And there's bound to be lots of places where that is resisted. And this certainly would have been one of them. "I took you, David, from the pastures and following sheep to be a prince over my people." I did that. Did you? "I have fought alongside you and defeated your enemies." And in this last story that you had, where the Philistines came running back frightened and ran right into David's army in the second battle, that was God's doing on the other end. We don't know what God did, but there wasn't anybody out there besides God to do it. "I will make you a great name, like the great ones of the earth." And this is the statue of David, and I very politely only did the upper half. "I will plant my people and protect them from evil and enemies." You know, there's a flaw in the human mind that allows people with power to assume, since all is going according to their plans, that God is on their.
Hey, no.
Well, yes. Oh, yes. And it seems here that God is helping David not to fall into that trap. And we know that David's capable of doing that. "And David, I will make from your offspring a house." And there's a play on the word house in this. It's either house dynasty or house, meaning a temple. "I will make from your offspring a house, and a descendant of yours will build a house for me, but not you." "I will be father to him too. If he does wrong, I will punish him. However, I will not take my love from him as I did with Saul." This is huge. This is the first time that there is an unconditional contract between God's people and God. Up to now, you obey the laws and I'll be with you. You don't obey the laws and I'll leave. And again, this is in Babylon where this is being thought about. God will not abandon or will not abandon David's heirs, even if they do what is evil in God's sight, which is a thing that happens in Deuteronomistic texts. God will be with them, even as God chastises and punishes them. Here is the first covenant between human beings and God that is unconditional. You're looking at me like, what's conditional about this? Do you have a question? If you were editing this manuscript as an exile in Babylon, how would you understand this statement? To all intents and purposes, it looks like there is no heir in David's line at that point. And it looks like God isn't with them. And yet, in faith, they're editing this text to say something different.
Well, there was that double meaning of house.
Mhm.
a few slides ago.
Mhm.
It's a metaphor. The first use, I think, nice. The other word house,
Mhm.
to relate that David's ancestors, David's descendants was in the temple. And given that David had so many wives, he was bound to have a son.
And probably, you know, somehow Jesus is supposed to be able to trace his line to David. So you're right. With all those wives, there is somebody. It just doesn't look like it at the moment. And this is the very same time when Isaiah talks about the stump of the tree of Jesse sprouting a branch. Out of this moment in the book of Samuel emerges the possibility for Paul and ultimately Luther to rely on the concept of justification by faith. It's from this moment. Does that follow?
I'm not sure if I follow.
This is the first moment when God says, it doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to be with you.
Unconditional.
Which is more of a Christian
Right. It's that New Testament.
versus eye for an eye.
Right. Mhm.
But this is like what? 500 BC or something?
1000 BC to 946 BC, probably.
Yeah, written.
Yeah, but rewritten in 500,
Okay, so it could have been,
580 to 5 what? I forgot, 513 maybe, somewhere in that range. Which is interesting. If you look at the Mediterranean at that time, that was the time when things were beginning to shift. It was kind of like a Renaissance shift in the art. It wasn't stiff. They were beginning to make real people, have them sort of move out from the wall in their, if they were, you know, a part of a statue that was up above a temple, they would, you know, there was emotion coming out of the beginning of the theater in just the tragedies of, you know, just sitting there watching this story that you know isn't going to end well. And and it's like, you know, the world was kind of having a Renaissance moment. And this is where it shows up here. Okay. Your house, your kingdom, and your throne shall be established forever. Nathan spoke all these words to David, and then David went to the tabernacle and sat before the Lord and prayed. This is all the kings that ending with the one that was eating at the emperor's table, and these were the kings of Israel and on the as you're looking at it on the right side. What follows is a prayer broken into three themes. He shows deference to God. He does doxology or praise. And there's a hint of demand. Let's try to see where the prayer turns from one to the other. David said, "O Lord, who am I and what am I is my house that you showed me this favor?" So is that praise or deference? But you have done more. You have spoken of your servant's house, David's dynasty, and guaranteed it will survive for a long time. O Lord, what can I do for you? I realize you have created the greatness I enjoy. There is no one like you. And deference, both, yeah, both. Who is like your people Israel? You have established them yourself, O Lord, so they may be your people forever. I don't know. I mean, both. I don't know. As for your house, do what you have promised, and this is dynasty. Let it continue forever, and your name will be magnified forever. I am grateful for your promise and your blessing. Amen. This promise for eternal continuation of David's house is one that Christians have remembered. They believe that Jesus was born to David's family. They believe Jesus is eternally alive and enthroned by God in heaven. And they believe that is how God has fulfilled that promise. Another major way this promise to David affects our lives is through the modern nation of Israel. This biblical text inspired many Europeans, both Christians and Jews, to recreate the nation of Israel near Jerusalem following World War II. And you can see it in the documents from World War I forward. They gave portions of Palestine to the Jewish people as they redrew the political map of the whole world. And they created Israel partially because they believed it is what God wanted.
That's because there wouldn't be a second coming to tell.
Whatever.
That's the rationale.
Right, it would be for some, yeah.
And that's why the fundamentalists seem to be so pro-Israel.
Huh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, or I didn't put it together. Huh. God did not want David to build a temple, but that did not mean that God left the arena of public power. Neither can we. Our loyalty to God and our baptismal covenant creates a relationship with God that permits, even requires us to judge what we see and speak critically when power is abused. People who give voice to criticism in the arena of public power can help us change course. Whom do you believe is exercising this power now? Have you done so recently? Should be done. I think the senator from Wyoming is doing her best now. But that's me on my side of the political world.
On the right side, though, like people who give voice to criticism in the arena of public power, let's change course about the evangelical radio talk shows.
Mhm.
What's next?
Lots of political power, yeah. So I suppose we do it in faith that somehow God's gonna figure out how to handle whatever we try to resist or change. And maybe we do by vote, maybe we do. God did allow Solomon to build a temple. Can you think of reasons why God did not want David to be the one to build a temple for the ark? What do you think, Mike?
Wow. Thought it wasn't time. Had to see if they were going to stay there in the Jerusalem area, and if David's reign was going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had such a huge, he united North and South areas
Mm-hmm.
and 4 regions within them. That was really a political challenge.
Yeah, it was. And you're right, too, that maybe people needed a longer time to adjust to that change, and putting a temple up too soon would not have been supportable if people weren't truly behind seeing David and Jerusalem as the place it should be.
We didn't learn from this with Afghanistan. When we first got in there after the trade bombings, there was a consensus among all the tribes that there was this leader that we wanted to have kind of generally rule the tribes. And we said, nope, we're going to have Karzai run it.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
after trillions of dollars and thousands of deaths, that didn't work too well.
Mhm.
The complexity of how a tribal system in such a large area evolves.
Mhm.
They should have read this first and then allowed that to run.
Well, didn't the Soviet Union make the same mistake?
Doing what?
What Mike was talking about.
In Afghanistan?
They invaded Afghanistan.
They did. I'm not sure they ever hoped to annex it. I'm not sure they ever hoped to annex it. I don't know, but I do know that they just drained the resources out of it and left. I don't know. Anyone who knows the history of Afghanistan should know. Not that I know all of it. David fulfilled his promise to Jonathan and Saul. We did that story, so let's skip that. It must have. There we go.
Like David wasn't pure, he was an adulterer.
He wasn't yet, but maybe
Okay.
God could see that on the horizon. That he wasn't quite steady enough in the faith to be the one.
Yeah, that's his husband killed, right? So-
Yeah, we'll do that before we're finished here today. We won't resolve it. Yeah. I kind of think that too. I think he could see that David was walking the edge, maybe wasn't strong enough to do this. After David's empire was established, there was one last battle for control. It began when a loyal friend, the king of the Ammonites, died. David sent envoys to the funeral. Now, an envoy, this is for the 4th graders. Now, envoys are high-ranking friends and colleagues of a ruler who go to a funeral in place of the king or the president. Our president usually sends the vice president or the secretary of state when he can't go. David was prepared to give his dead friend's son, Hanun, all the loyalty and respect David had given to his father. However, princes among the Ammonites said to Hanun, those envoys from David are not friends. They are here to spy and start the process of overthrowing you and taking your lands. Hanun believed his advisors and seized the envoys, and he shaved off their beards, which apparently half of their beard, that is, and cut their robes so they were half naked, and then sent them home. Apparently shaving the beard is a huge deal. So, well, it would pluck it, but yeah.
And I live right near the very Orthodox synagogue on Bellevue. And I go by all the time, I don't know, on my way to the freeway, most of the time, I'm on my way to Merrie. And And so on Fridays and Saturdays, seeing all of these Orthodox men, many of them who still look very Eastern European. Someone the other day, I hadn't seen this for a while, one of those big furry Eastern, sort of Ukrainian, whatever, that fur helmet. Kinds of thing you just see a habit. So, that whole thing about demons and all that still plays strongly. Size of the portion back, certainly some clean shavings there too.
Well, these men were so humiliated that the envoys were so embarrassed about their beards that David housed them in a palace in Jericho until their hair grew back. When the Ammonites saw how angry they had made David, they turned to some Arameans in Zobah, Makkah, and Todd to provide soldiers. When David heard they were amassing an army, he sent Joab to prevent the Aramean forces from meeting up with the Ammonite. And David sent Joab's brother Abishai to fight the Ammonites so they would not join with the Arameans. Make sense? Two armies are coming and he's going to keep them from getting together. Right? First, the Arameans fled the battle. Then the Ammonites fled for safety behind city walls, and the city was named Rabbah. At the news that David's army had defeated a horde of 33,000 Arameans, other Arameans were recruited out of Mesopotamia. David led an army that met the new set of enemies, and eventually the Arameans fled. After that, the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites and stopped. In the spring of the next year, David sent Joab and his army to Rabbah, the Ammonite stronghold fort. They lay siege to Rabbah until the Ammonites surrendered. As a result, David was home in his palace without much to do. And David lived at the top of a hill, and he discovered he could look down into the private courtyard of a home nearby. David, with God's blessing, was confident, bold, decisive, and energetic. He was about to lose that blessing through an arrogant choice, and he will actually endure God's curse. Under the curse, David is anxious, tentative, inactive, and anguished. The public David functions, but will no longer be able to ignore the personal David. And the two will be in deep, unresolvable tension until his dying day. And this is, I think, Brueggemann that I quoted. At this point, something happens, and they even think there was a different author at this point in the manuscript, because we get a lot about emotion that wasn't there before. We were just getting chronicles, history, and now we're going to step into the personal life in the palace of several people. And at the same time, not too far away, maybe 50 years later, the Greeks were doing the same thing. And I can only speak to those two. I don't know anything about. They were beginning to really allow emotion to affect their art, both on the theater and in sculpture. So it may be a trend of some kind, but it's interesting. This becomes more of a novel than anything you read in the Bible up to this point. That's, and you'll correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong about that, but it seems that way. David's colossal mistake. David imitates the beyond the low behavior of other rulers of his day who answer to no one. However, unlike them, David will answer to God, who is, as always, the real king of Israel. At this moment, David seems to have forgotten that. Do we have time? You're looking.
Oh, no,
Okay.
I watched this.
David looked into the courtyard of a beautiful woman who was taking a bath and thought she was in a private place. Now David should have turned away and not watched. He did not. David should have sent a messenger to the woman's house to inform her that she could be seen and that she should put up a screen. He did not. Instead, he sent a servant to find out who she was and to invite her to his palace. Her name was Bathsheba, and she was married to Uriah the Hittite. Uriah was an older but very loyal soldier with David's army. I like the messenger, don't you? Now, there is no way to know to what degree Bathsheba wanted to be a part of a friendship with David. When the king sent for a woman, she was not free to say no. And I think that's true. What do you think? Would she have been able to say no, do you think? Yeah. David and Bathsheba behaved as though they were married. This is again for fourth grade, though they were not. Bathsheba told David later that spring, I am pregnant. I had one fourth grader who was well beyond her years in some knowledge, and she went, oh, the rest of the class was just passive. David immediately and honorably promised to protect Bathsheba from the scandal of becoming pregnant while her husband was away at the war in Rabbah. David sent for Uriah, Bathsheba's husband. David claimed he wanted the views of an ordinary soldier on the way the war was going. After questioning Uriah about the war, he suggested Uriah might enjoy being home with his wife overnight. David was hoping Uriah would believe that Uriah had gotten his wife pregnant because he had come home and stayed with her. Unfortunately, Uriah did not go visit his wife. He slept in the gatehouse in the city wall so as not to enjoy the privilege his fellow soldiers could not enjoy. When David found out where Uriah spent the night, he invited him to dinner and got him drunk, hoping he would forget about his fellow soldiers and go home. Uriah did not. The next morning, David wrote a message to Joab, sealed it, and sent it by Uriah's own hand. The message said, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, then draw back from him so that he may be struck down and die. Now, even fourth graders got the magnitude of having the man carry his own death sentence. That they really honed in on, that, you know. When the Hittite soldier named Uriah did die, and no one except David did die, and no one except David and Joab and God knew Uriah had been murdered, or that Uriah himself carried the message that instructed Joab, there's not even a complete sentence here, sorry, instructed Joab to murder him. So nobody knew. After Uriah died, Jacob sent a messenger to David. The message apologized to David for an unnecessary loss of life. Earlier, I had named Joab as a possible henchman, and I think this is where it comes into effect. The message said, the men came out of the city gate to fight against us in the field, but we drove them back to the gate, in fact, too close to the gate. The enemy archers shot at your servants from the top of the wall. Some of your soldiers died. In particular, the soldier whom you spoke with a few days ago, the one named Uriah the Hittite, died. And David replied, tell Joab, Do not let the matter trouble you, for the sword of war devours one and now another. Press your attack on the city and overthrow it. When Uriah's wife Bathsheba heard of her husband's death, she made lamentation for him, and that means she wailed with the professional wailers. Then she arranged the funeral and mourned for him for at least a week after that, and that would be a minimal requirement. She may have done more. And when the mourning was over, David sent for her and married her. And eventually she bore him a son. So David saved Bathsheba from public scandal by giving her child a father, since the real father was unknown. And that's as far as I intend to go today. Anyway.
I remember this. Thinking, and we had some question of text, the paper that had to do with this. I mean, so I have paper sitting in front. And after I said something about this was after they discovered that she was pregnant, and David had to come up with some kind of solution for this. Totally unconscious. David conceived the plan. And the neighbor came back to this in a circle. And the professor talked to someone, and he said, I hope this was an intentional plan. And I had to tell him, no, it wasn't intentional.
Yeah. I love the story of Nathan and Nathan's approach to this problem. You have a king who's behaving badly. He's behaving like all the other kings in the neighborhood. And you have to wonder, is he going to kill me just because I bring this up? You know? And so he figures out a way to trap David into admitting his own guilt. And I think it's marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. And in a way that would, you know, somehow shield him perhaps from David's wrath. But he has no idea what he's dealing with anymore because David's gone off the rails. It's pretty dangerous. So you're welcome. Yeah. This is, you know, I just think people ought to know this story and it's great. I mean, it's got everything in it. Yeah. Have you seen the Brick Bible? The Brick Bible? It's Bible stories with photographs of Lego soldiers illustrating it. I'll bring you a copy if you like. It's pretty funny.